Ladies and gentlemen, good evening to all. You are once again welcome here. Former French President Nicolas Sarkozy breaks the silence and spits his four truths to the European Union and NATO. He tells raw truths and it sows disorder in the thinking of Ukraine. From NATO, from the European Union, Nicolas Sarkozy has not minced his words. He is firmly opposed to Ukraine's accession to the European Union, extremely opposed to Ukraine's accession to NATO. Yes, Nicolas Sarkozy broke his silence. So what did he say concretely? What motivates him? That's what we're going to talk about in this video conference. I humbly ask you to share as much as possible. Put a lot of hearts, a lot of likes, share the video conference in all possible groups. And most importantly, don't forget to click subscribe if you are not already subscribed. And the magic message, always leave a word in the comment. Let's go into the depths. Then Nicolas Sarkozy makes a very severe observation because certain European states are in the process of agitation. They want Ukraine to join the European Union. Because the Union, how? Because Ukraine itself is stirring up severely. She wants to join NATO. Nicolas Sarkozy makes a harsh observation. She says that Ukraine's accession, whether to NATO or the European Union, is a strategic mistake. Don't even think about it. Nicolas Sarkozy judges. That integrating Ukraine into the European Union or NATO would amount to weakening the security of the European continent. If Ukraine joins, it's over. Because Ukraine is like this country that drags batteries of war behind it. Ukraine joins the European Union or NATO. NATO is at war with Russia. This means that the European Union is at war with Russia. That's what it means. For Nicolas Sarkozy, this decision would only accentuate tensions with Moscow and make a return to stability in Europe impossible. Now, as you know very well, when there is no stability in Europe, yes, the United States of America is their heart fund, Niamini, are happy since they, themselves also in their heads and in their thoughts. All their fight is how to continue to dominate the world, even if the others have to weaken. That's not their problem. Great Britain has a similar thought. So this former French president who negotiated directly with Putin in 2008, we must recall the case of Georgia he says that the West is playing a dangerous game by pushing Kiev towards NATO and Ukraine. He says it clearly, the West is playing a very dangerous game. And so what is the observation he had to make? First, he begins by noting Kiev's military weakness. Yes, he observes, like many French people, especially the authorities, refuse to understand this truth. Nicolas Sarkozy, in his posture as a former head of state, is telling the truth. This is a truth for Emmanuel Macron, who puts himself like a gang leader at the head of this so-called coalition. Volunteers to stand up against Russia, Nicolas Sarkozy. He affirms that Kiev does not have the means to win the conflict against Moscow. It is Sarkozy who says it. Kiev does not have the means to win the conflict against Moscow. If someone promises Kiev victory on the battlefield, the person is deceiving Kiev. First observation, therefore. Through this observation, Nicolas Sarkozy joins many actors who talk about the military and industrial superiority of Russia, which makes a Ukrainian victory unlikely. We've already seen him for 3 years. The European forces, the NATO forces united, are rising up against Russia, but they can do nothing. They can do nothing. Russia is still strong and powerful. Great Russia. So what European officials are silent, refuse to say. This is what Sarkozy says openly. Ukraine cannot win this war. And Donald Trump didn't fail to say that either, didn't he? There you go. It is what Sarkozy is saying going to fall on good ears. I don't know what I respect. These are raw truths that NATO has heard, that the European Union has heard, because whatever happens, he is a former French head of state. So, what are the consequences for Ukraine and Europe? It must already be said that Nicolas Sarkozy considered territorial losses inevitable. He says the territories that are already conquered by Russia will remain with Russia. Ukraine should understand this and integrate this into its capabilities, into its ways of doing things. So, according to Nicolas Sarkozy, Ukraine will have to accept territorial losses against Russia. Why? Because Ukraine cannot win the war against Russia. For Nicolas Sarkozy, this outcome is not a choice but an inescapable reality. It is a reality. There is no choice to make. The territories must be sealed. So here is the discourse of truth. Ukraine is pushed into the illusion of reconquest as she loses ground. And that's the truth. Unfortunately, when we talk about it here, a lot of people say, well, you're exaggerating a bit, but here's a former French president. Even if in Africa we have a lot of graphs against this gentleman that we know who has done dirty jobs in Africa, we all know that. But in any case, with regard to their own situation there, what he is saying is a truth, and it is touching the hearts of many European and NATO leaders especially. Nicolas Sarkozy is not limited to this. He talks about the impact on the West and on Moscow. Yes, for Moscow, it is not Nicolas Sarkozy who speaks of the impact, but rather we highlight the impact of this declaration, of this raw truth of Sarkozy on Moscow and on. The West then, it must be said that for Moscow, this position confirms that the West itself admits Russia's solidity. The West recognizes because he is a former head of state and therefore for Europe, it is an admission of strategic failure. Enlargement is no longer perceived as a strength, but as a risk if they do it on purpose, if they stop expanding NATO to Ukraine. It is not going to be a force now since before. When the states joined NATO, it was the force that multiplied. But this time, if it happens, it's going to be a big risk. And the risk of direct confrontation with Russia and Russia is unfortunately not trivial. And so, ladies and gentlemen, that was the news. Thank you for sharing it as much as possible. I'll be right back with new information. It was the voice of your only samurai.